Team 37.
Thank you for having us. Today we have Dennis, Rachel, Lynn, Justin, and Daniel.
We have always been proud of our lands. Crystal clear waters brimming with biodiversity have characterized the Thon watershed for decades, attracting tourists and avid boaters and fishermen. However, we have now found a jumping menace in our midst, the silver carp. This fish could have extreme impacts on our ecosystem, as well as our economy and our citizens. As members of the Envirothon Aquatic Conservation Group, we have developed a viable plan that will help us to stop the silver carp in its tracks. Today, we will show you why we must act now, possible introduction vectors for the silver carp, as well as its current status, how we can manage our current population and monitor for future populations, how we can prevent other invasive species from entering our watershed, and how we can include our entire community in our plan. With your help, we can raise awareness for this issue as we work together to protect our watershed.
Now, before we learn about the impacts of the silver carp, we first want to learn a little bit about its biology. The silver carp is a large fish which has the unique habit of leaping out of the water when it is startled by boat propellers. It feeds on phytoplankton and zooplankton, and because it feeds almost continuously, it can eat up to 20% of its body weight in a single day. Now, by combining this biology with the climatic characteristics of our area, we can come up with a risk assessment for the silver carp. Unfortunately, there is a very high risk that the silver carp will become established in our area with a reasonable certainty. And if it does become established, there is a very high risk that there will be ecological damages with a very high certainty. These ecological damages stem from the fact that the silver carp feeds on the phytoplankton and the zooplankton. These plankton form the basis of the food chain for the native juvenile fish in our area. So by outcompeting these fishes, the silver carp is effectively removing the basis of the food web, drastically reducing biodiversity. Think of it like a line of dominoes. If you knock down the first domino, the rest of them are going to fall with it. In fact, in the United States, the silver carp has so reduced biodiversity that 9 out of every 10 fish species pulled from the Mississippi River are carp, according to Fisheries and Oceans Canada. The silver carp has added drawbacks in that it can introduce disease, such as spring virus, which can further infect and harm our fish populations. And the silver carp increases algae production, which can create thick mats of algae that harbor toxic bacteria and increase eutrophication within our lake. As you can see, there are plenty of environmental benefits that warrant action on their own, but there are also economic and social benefits, as Dennis will now describe.
As you know, our watershed is extraordinary, not only bringing in tens of thousands of anglers and cottagers each year to enjoy our beautiful lakes and lands, but also it is incredibly productive and valuable for our economy and society. In fact, the ecosystem services provided by our watershed are valued at nearly $1 billion. But the presence of the silver carp looks to throw a wrench into all of that. And with so much to lose, the unmitigated impact of the silver carp on our ecosystem would be drastic and devastating. For reference, the Invasive Species Center estimates that if the Asian carp were to get into the Great Lakes, the annual cost could get up to $7 billion, and the impact on our ecosystem would be similarly drastic. These losses would first be manifested by decreases in fishing revenue, both recreationally and commercially, as the silver carp feeds on the food sources of both adult piscivores and sport fish. This in turn would reduce other fishing revenues such as fish harvesting, processing, and exporting, and fishing-related industries such as boat rentals, equipment production, and boating-related tourism. Tourism would also be further reduced due to the presence of the algal blooms that Dan mentioned earlier, which will crowd out native species, reducing availability of wildlife viewing as well as shoreline use. However, this is still not all. The silver carp will also bring with it a multitude of negative social impacts for our community. First, our citizens will notice that they are less connected with nature and are also unable to utilize the rich stores of natural resources that our watershed so generously provides. And second, we cannot underestimate the impact of the silver carp on our First Nation communities, who rely on our lakes to provide them with clean water and healthy fish populations, not just for sustenance, but also for their traditions and ceremonies. Also, we must be wary of the impact of the silver carp on human health, as it is known to jump out of the water, endangering those nearby. And finally, our entire community will suffer from the loss of natural beauty that the silver carp will cause. As you can clearly see, the silver carp is not a simple problem, but a complex one that is a tremendous threat to many facets of the way our community lives.
Before you can implement a solution to a problem, you need to understand where it began. Similarly, we will look into the roots of the silver carp introduction in order to better understand how it branches out. Silver carp were introduced to the United States for aquacultural purposes. Unfortunately, due to uncontrolled flooding, the carp escaped into the Mississippi River and has spread as far north as Canada. Our conservation group believes that the silver carp were introduced to the Thon watershed either through a connecting waterway or directly into the Rainy Lake itself. The method of introduction may have either been the flooding of a nearby aquaculture operation, the relocation of silver carp for consumption purposes, or the unintentional dumping of a bait bucket that may have contained silver carp young or eggs. Now, whatever the actual introduction method of the silver carp may have been, it's imperative that we employ a proper plan for the management of this harmful aquatic invader.
But before we can even think about implementing management and prevention strategies, we must begin with an initial inventory. Think of it like this. If you're trying to buy a house, you don't start by financing a mortgage. You have to look at the property itself, the surrounding area, and local school district, for example. Similarly, we must know where our efforts are needed first in order to decide our management techniques. The initial inventory will provide us with information that is critical to the success of our plan. First and foremost, we must learn the full extent of the silver carp infestation, particularly in vulnerable and high-value areas, such as Rainy, Sunny, and Stormy Lake. Additionally, we will also learn the location of current and new infestations. And we will also be able to determine the age and sex structure of current populations. This is of critical importance, as according to Fisheries and Oceans Canada, merely 10 mature females and 10 males have at least a 50% chance of breeding. With our initial inventory, we'll be able to gain a better understanding of our current problem, as well as what management techniques work best for us, as Velan will now describe.
Once we've gathered information from this initial inventory, we can then implement management and monitoring strategies. This visual outlines techniques as well as their relative costs, with $1 sign being the most cost-effective and $3 signs being the most expensive. Our team has decided that our main management strategy for the silver carp is harvesting, since it is a low-impact, very cost-effective method. We will be harvesting the silver carp, but collaboration with the local citizens in our community is key to the success of this plan. We will be working with the Ministry of Natural Resources and Forestry to ensure that citizens have proper fishing licenses and that there are no bag or size limits on the silver carp. Now, silver carp that are too small to be used will be killed and eviscerated to ensure that we comply with the Aquatic Invasive Species Regulation of 2015. Now, after we've implemented these management strategies, we can begin utilizing ongoing monitoring to ensure that our plan is effective in the long term. Ongoing monitoring is contingent upon citizen science, as well as monitoring that will be done by our team. Citizens can help by calling in to the invasive species hotline, as well as inputting any silver carp or other invasives that they find into the Early Detection and Distribution Maps Ontario. Our team will be conducting yearly monitoring surveys utilizing electrofishing that will be done in the spring before silver carp go to spawn. Additionally, we will be using environmental DNA monitoring by taking samples from our water and sending them to the Ministry of Natural Resources and Forestry to conduct testing in order to see if there's any evidence of silver carp in our waterways. We will also be working with the Invasive Species Center as well as the Fisheries and Oceans Canada to pull together a larger range of data on silver carp and other invasive species in this area. By implementing these management and monitoring strategies, we are taking a large step toward the control of these harmful aquatic invaders.
Once we have managed our current populations, we must be extremely vigilant to make sure that we are not overrun by other common invaders, such as the bighead or grass or black carp or other aquatic invaders, or terrestrial invasive species as well. These measures will also help prevent the spread of the silver carp and its reintroduction in the future. We can implement boating protocols to make sure that only properly cleaned and dried boats enter and leave our waterways. The Invasive Species Awareness Program has designated the clean, drain, dry, and disinfect method as the best way to prevent the spread of invasive species such as the zebra mussel and aquatic weeds. Also, bait bucket dumping is an extremely common way of introduction for invasive fish, such as the round and tube-nosed goby and young Asian carp. We can place signs about 30 meters back from the shoreline to make sure that boaters and anglers have a safe spot to dump their bait. Finally, education is the most cost-effective way that we can raise awareness for this issue. We must educate border control agents about vectors because many invasive species slip through the cracks around our nation's borders. We can work with the Great Lakes Panel for Aquatic Nuisance Species to make sure that these people can identify silver and other carp species because importing these fish into Canada is illegal under the Invasive Species Act. Also, early detection is key to preventing a mass outbreak. As we all know, controlling a smaller population is much easier than controlling a larger population.
Now, just like an electric car needs a charge in order to run, our plan is going to need community support in order to be successful. Therefore, we must reach out to the community and educate the public in order to garner support for the aid in the implementation of our plan. Though this may sound daunting, don't worry, as we have many options we can choose from to implement, several of which have successfully been utilized in areas around us. For example, Ontario's Invading Species Awareness Program successfully reached millions of people simply by utilizing their local media outlets. We can do similarly using local TV stations, radio broadcasts, and newspapers to reach a large base of people very easily. And we will go one step further, utilizing social media as another method of engaging the community. Specifically, we will create a Twitter page, which will act as a reliable means of communication from our group to the public, as well as means for the public to contact us with any questions or possible invasive species sightings. Also, members from our group will work with local schools, giving informative assemblies and coordinating with the creators of the curriculum, ensuring that our youth are properly educated on the subjects of invasive species, and specifically the silver carp, as well as incorporating citizen science from a young age. Furthermore, we will be placing informative signs at areas identified as high risk or where the silver carp is known to preside. These signs will also have QR codes placed upon them, which will be linked to a portion of our website, which will be dedicated to the education of the public on the subjects of silver carp, and specifically our plan. Finally, we can choose to implement programs from Ontario's Invading Species Awareness Program, such as Pet Store Outreach or Clean Boat, Clean Tournament, which teach pet owners and anglers respectively about what they can do to reduce the risk of invasive species spread. And simply by implementing these two simple programs, we are already combating 2 of the 4 main methods of invasive species dispersal as identified by Central Lakes Ontario Conservation. However, this is still not all, as we are also implementing several engaging community-wide activities, as Justin will now discuss.
In addition to the creative outreach programs Dennis described, we will also be creating a local citizens committee in which people of many backgrounds and perspectives can voice opinions, concerns, and suggestions for our plan. This will improve not only public perception, but also acceptance of our plan. This committee is of utmost importance to our First Nation neighbors as they have important rights to timber, to fish, and to farm. With this, we will be upholding Ontario's Environmental Bill of Rights, which states that everyone has the right to be involved in our environment, and make sure that environmental justice is upheld for everyone in our community. And as the exciting cornerstone of our outreach program, we will be creating an Enville Invasive Species Day, which will have activities and showcases dedicated to invasive species. There would be representatives of the Ontario Federation of Anglers and Hunters who could speak about how silver carp affects or could affect their industries, as well as proper methods for both boat cleaning and cleaning equipment. Representatives from First Nation communities could come and talk about their traditional fishing grounds, as well as how silver carp poses a direct threat to them. A trivia contest for kids based on information they've learned in and out of school is a fun, creative way to reach out to our youth. And most exciting of all, chefs from local restaurants could come and teach people how to cook with silver carp, and even other invaders such as garlic mustard, a truly pest-to-plate approach. These creative and exciting methods will make sure our community is entirely involved and make sure that everyone is involved in the fight against invasive species.
Now, as leaders within our government, you may be worried about the cost of our plan. We would like to remind you that this is a long-term management plan, and its benefits will only be increased with the more support that we receive. Now, the main cost to our plan does involve the electrofishing, which we will be using for management, as Vlin described. The equipment for this will cost around $20,000, and it's going to cost about $500 per year to run. Other costs are going to come in the form of the signs, which cost about $20 a piece, and the community day. With the community day, we can help drive down some of these costs by using volunteer labor from the community itself and from our organization. Although we cannot give you an exact estimate at this time, we will be able to closer to the event itself. And luckily, all of the other aspects of our plan are going to be of little or no cost to you, such as education, but they will still have fantastic benefits. And for any costs that do arise, we can use grants, such as the Charles Stewart Mott Grant and the Eco Action Grant. And it is important to remember that the cost of doing nothing is still much, much less than the cost of action in this plan. Invasive species already cost Ontario $35 billion per year, according to the Invasive Species Center. So our plan is going to far undercut the potential costs of the carp in our area. From this, it is clear that the economic understanding of this issue is going to lead to many, many benefits.
Our plan will provide myriad economic benefits for our community. By managing and preventing the spread of silver carp, we will be not only preserving, but also enhancing our local fishing industry, valued at over $4.4 billion, according to the National Marine Manufacturers Association. A local economic market for invasive species could also be established, benefiting our regional economy. Homeowners and cottagers will also be pleased as they see their property values increase over time. And our plan will also see decreased future management costs as we deal with problems before they become impossible to tackle. With our plan, we will ensure to maintain a more vibrant regional economy for many years to come.
Our plan provides countless social benefits as well. By implementing this plan, the area will see an increase in aesthetic appeal. This increase in aesthetic appeal will increase recreation and tourism to the area, such as boating, fishing, and cottaging. Our citizens will feel a stronger connection to the nature around them, and our local government will see this through their citizens' greater appreciation for their environment. By controlling for silver carp, a species that jumps out of the water, we're creating safer conditions and a cleaner and healthier environment. And finally, we were protecting the rights of our First Nation neighbors, such as their rights to farm, timber rights, and fishing rights, and also preserving the water that is so vital to their rich traditions. Now, it may be difficult to put numbers and figures on social benefits, as you can easily do for economic benefits. Our plan is sure to provide just as many benefits socially as it promises to provide economically and environmentally.
As Wieland mentioned, our plan does provide a slew of environmental benefits. This begins with our soils, where we're going to see less stream bank erosion and increased soil organic matter due to an increase in biodiversity within the soil. For our aquatic areas, we are going to see an increase in biodiversity and a reduction of algal blooms, which is also going to decrease eutrophication within our lake. Furthermore, our forests are going to see the conservation of important riparian habitat, and we will be protecting diversity, both vertical diversity and species diversity. Finally, our wildlife areas are going to see the increase in critical habitat, which is important because according to the Ministry of Natural Resources and Forestry, 40% of Ontario's endangered and threatened species live in this southern region of Ontario, so they need to be protected. And our wildlife will also see a reduction in disease. From this, it is clear that all of our major natural resource areas are going to see benefits from our plan.
And a vital component of any plan is its ability to involve all of its interest groups. And our plan makes sure to include every stakeholder, from government agencies such as the Ministry of Natural Resources and Forestry to environmental agencies such as the Invasive Species Center or Ontario's Federation of Anglers and Hunters, as well as municipalities, residential, recreational, boating, and tourism industries, as well as both First Nations and cottager communities nearby. In doing this, our plan ensures that all of the community is involved in our solution.
As you've seen today, we've shown you how our viable and creative plan, like our proud provincial flower, the white trillium, is composed of 3 petals: prevention, monitoring, and education. These 3 are held firmly together by the most important aspect to the success of our plan, the community. Before we end our presentation today, I'd like to leave the minister and his associates with some final words. A First Nation proverb states that we do not inherit the earth from our ancestors, but rather we borrow it from our children. We could not agree more. We must leave a better environment for our children than the one we have now. We must take immediate action, and that action must be swift and deliberate. We know that today we've convinced you of the need for immediate action, and we know that our plan will successfully fill the role of that action. Thank you for your time, and we'll take questions now.
Okay, you didn't give total numbers of your budget, but if you were only given half of your budget, what would your priorities be?
Well, our first priority would be to, actually, can I borrow this? I'm so sorry. All right. So our first priority would be to work in the education aspect, because we find that without that, the community has no backing, and therefore the plan has no backing. Specifically, we would like to start within the school system. The youth are the rising generation, and they need to know what to do when we are no longer there to do it. And even more so than this, it will spark conversations within homes, and it will mobilize the entire community to get behind our plan.
And to build off what Dennis is saying, basically, even if we control or eradicate silver carp populations or other invasive species, if we don't provide the rising generation, the youth of our community, then the plan in the future is meaningless, and it will not continue to be an ongoing process in the future.
And we also mentioned that it's much more cost-effective to control a species when it's in a smaller population than when it's in a larger population. So if we can teach our citizens in our community to learn how to identify these species on days like the community days that we were discussing earlier, they can report them to us via social media or other methods, and then we can go and eradicate them before they become too widespread of a problem.
And it's important to note that a lot of the education is very cost efficient, if not no cost at all. So with half of our budget, we would still be able to implement harvesting operations and even some other control or prevention methods with just half of our budget.
How would you measure the short and long-term success of your plan?
So that would be done through our monitoring, which will be done yearly, and in the long term, we will hope to see a decrease in the populations of the silver carp, and in the short term with our yearly inventories, we hope to also see a decrease, but over time, our main goal is eradication of the silver carp.
And the way that we can judge as to whether or not our plan was a success, looking at it as a whole, is whether or not we have reduced the Asian carp to a level that the native species are still able to provide all of their natural ecosystem services. So that is going to be the metric as to whether or not this plan was a success, and we'll be able to use the monitoring to determine that.
How would you go about building a sense of community support around this issue?
Well, as we mentioned, we have a very vast and diverse method of engaging the community. As I mentioned, we're utilizing Twitter and social media, which targets a large population now and a rising amount of people. But also schools, the community day, which gathers community, helps form community ties, as well as provides essential support for the implementation of our plan. So, as you mentioned, if you actually want to grab the visual quickly, we have listed what we're doing there if you want to see.
And in addition to what Dennis was talking about, with the creation of the Local Citizens Committee, we want to encourage our citizens to voice their concerns and opinions for our plan and really become an integral part of this process, because after all, it is our watershed and it is our environment that we are trying to manage and protect from silver carp and other invasive species.
I think if you want to look at it in simple terms, we want our involvement to be as habitual as people recycling. We want these people to monitor and see these invasive species, and we want it to be second nature to them.
And we think that it will be for them because of the potential negative benefits that these species can bring, such as you mentioned with the social, economic, and the environmental, that they want to see their community to be the best place that it can be, and targeting invasives is the way to do that.
And this is why education is so important. We need people to understand how bad these invasive species can be to our environment. So, and also with the Twitter pages, we're also targeting a younger audience there, so that we can increase support in coming generations as well.
How would you sustain the momentum of your plan over the longer term?
So that'll be done through our monitoring, and our group actually will do that monitoring, and that will be done yearly, but we have monitoring that can be done year-round with our citizen science, where our citizens can call into the invasive species hotline or input any invasive species that they detect or silver carp into what is called the Early Detection and Distribution Maps Ontario, which is actually a mobile app now that people can have on their smartphones. And if they find this species, they can take a picture of it, tag the location of where it was found, and that'll go into a database that we'll use for many years to come.
And to keep this going within the community, our Community Day is going to be held annually. So although this one may be about the silver carp, if there's a new invader that introduced, we can make the Community Day about that. And it's going to hopefully become an annual tradition that the community looks forward to. Because invasive species, sadly, are not going to be here in the near term. They're going to be here for a long, long time. So this Community Day is a good way to make sure that the community is staying involved, staying up to date on their education and their action and what they can do about it.
And if we take a rapid implementation of the plan we offer up today, we will begin to see decreases in fish populations, and that satisfaction, the noticeable effect, will provide momentum for the continuation of the plan into the future.
Would your plan be adaptable to other invasive species?
Yes, so we, a little bit earlier on, we discussed prevention measures because although the silver carp is here now, we want to prevent other species from entering before they enter, as the silver carp has done. So earlier on, I talked about making sure that every boat is properly cleaned and dried so that villagers of zebra mussels and other smaller fragments of plants and things like that don't enter our waterways accidentally, maybe through live wells or something like that. And also making sure that bait buckets are dumped at a proper, far enough away from the waterway to make sure that these aquatic invasive species don't enter our waterway.
And as previously mentioned, our Community Day can be adapted for a wide variety of invasive species. So for instance, the Ontario Federation of Anglers and Hunters every year holds what they call their garlic mustard poll. So we can incorporate that as possibly an activity for this Community Day. In the past 7 years alone, they have pulled over 5,000 pounds of garlic mustard. So this can combat other terrestrial invasive species, not just the aquatic ones.
And we can also, we're doing ongoing monitoring, not just for the silver carp, but also for other invasive species, which our community will help us with through reporting invasive species on the Twitter page and things like that as well.
You produced an excellent report in just one day. If you had more time, what area of the report would you focus on?
So there are several technologies that are possible in combating the Asian carp, other than just the electrofishing. We probably would examine more of those technologies and strategies to see if there are any that would more fit our plan, but we felt that in the short term that this was definitely the best option.
And some of those other different strategies are things such as actually carbon dioxide barriers, which actually diffuse gas into the waterways, preventing the movement of fish, and also a strain of actually the herpes virus, which can target silver carp and effectively reduce their populations to either manageable or non-existent populations.
The herpes virus has been on trial in Australia. So.
And it's important to note that if we had more time, we would have back our initial inventory, which will then give us more information about the extent of the invasion. We hope to have caught it at a very early time, which allows us to get a rapid response in and not have the necessity to implement such extreme measures as those that we have that are available, but are simply not optimal for the if we want to.
For the current infestation.
With the current infestation, exactly.
We believe. Yeah.
How would you market the benefits of your plan?
I think that the benefits generally speak for themselves. I mean, we can do this, again, with our community, involving our community at the Community Day. The potential impacts of these invasive species, I think people are already seeing, especially your shop owners and your boat rentals, your farmers, all of these areas already see these impacts. So they're going to see the potential benefits as well.
Well, we also, the local media outlets and our social media can not only be used for education, but we can also use them for, saying, oh, we've done this and this is how our plan has been beneficial. We can add numbers and statistics on how much our tourism industry has increased, or how much more native species we're seeing in our lakes and around our lakes, and information like that.
Team 37.